No, I have no heat on me right now, unfortunately. And in my case, don't even go to church. But they edit conservative magazines and they write conservative books. And they publish articles in conservative magazines, which nobody reads. But they're a world away in sensibilities from the red state conservatives. And I give as an example, I'll do it from memory, that if you poll Americans, and Gallup has been polling them since the 1970s, on do you think that consensual homosexual behavior should be legal or not legal, you get something like 35 or 40% of Americans saying it should not be legal. That's been pretty steady since the 1970s. It's hardly moved much, even with the thought revolution that the liberals have tried to bring on us. It's still up in the high 30s. The last time I looked, I think it was 37. Of Americans think that homosexual acts between consenting adults should not be legal. Now, I hang out with these metrocons. I hang out with metropolitan conservatives, and I am one. And I don't know anybody who thinks that homosexual acts should be illegal. Not in those circles. Metrocons don't think that. Metrocons are more tolerant. But, as I said, that's not the solid base of conservatism in America. The solid base is red state conservatives. So here you have these metrocons, these metropolitan conservatives, who are actually to the left of 35 or 40% of their fellow citizens. Not just their conservative fellow citizens, all their fellow citizens. So the metrocon is a species that I think could bear some examination, and I tried to do that in my book. You want to hit me on education?
We did. We talked
about education.
We did talk about that.
How about diversity?
Oh, yeah. You got a real problem with diversity. Well, that also feeds into the immigration chapter as well. You don't like the idea that, well, what is your problem with diversity? Why is it, let me bring up that chapter here. You got Yale or jail. I like that one. Those are your two choices. What's the problem with diversity? Why is that a bad thing?
Well, I let Professor Robert Putnam speak. This is a Harvard professor of sociology, and he did a survey back in 2001. Robert Putnam, some of you may have heard of Robert Putnam. He's a very highly respected scholar in his field. He wrote a book called Bowling Alone, back in the 90s. And it developed his main idea, which is of social capital. You know, economists talk about physical capital, which is goods and money and so on, and intellectual capital. And Putnam talks about social capital. Social capital is the value added to a society or to a community of social networks of all kinds, you know, Boy Scout troops and churches and carpools, ordinary friendships, every kind of voluntary social network. That all adds up to social capital. And he says, what I think is right, and I think we'd all agree, that social capital is a good thing. It's a good thing for a society to have lots of social capital. And he wrote this book, Bowling Alone, where he lamented the loss of social capital in America over the last quarter of the 20th century. Well, now, after that, in 2000, he decided to try to find out why we're losing our social capital. Why are we losing it? What's driving that? And he found that one reason we're losing it is our diversity, our increasing diversity. He conducted surveys all over the United States, very big surveys. You know, it's just Harvard University. They got a bundle of money. They got a, $30 billion endowment. Probably a lot less now, but at that time, a big endowment. So he had tens of thousands of people in these surveys that he did, trying to find out whether diversity helped or hindered social capital. And he found out, to his dismay, because he himself is a liberal, he found out that the more diversity you have, the less social capital you have. The more diversity you have in a community, the less people associate, the less people talk to each other, the less people carpool, the less people join voluntary groups. And that was a very shocking finding for him, as I tell the story in my book. He waited 6 years before publishing his results. He disliked his results so much. But fortunately, like me, He's an empiricist, and he wants the facts to speak. And at last he did let them speak. And he published a paper on this, a rather odd paper, which I have a little bit of fun with. But yeah, diversity is not good for you. It's bad for your society.
You say, in fact, in this diversity chapter, it's an early chapter in the book, the American philosophical constitutional creed is unlikely to retain its salience if Americans abandon the Anglo-Protestant culture in which it has been rooted. Again, this, I guess I conflated this in my mind with the immigration chapter, but basically you're saying we should stay white, we should stay Christian, and anything that goes away from that is somehow not good for this country. Is that basically your point of view?
Well, first of all, I'd just like to say that the words you just quoted are not my words.
Well, Anglo-Protestant.
They're the words of Professor Samuel Huntington.
Yes, right.
But
you're underscoring them as if to buttress your own position.
Yes, that's what you do. You quote scholars to support your position.
Correct.
When you write a book.
Right.
Yes.
So my point is, this is your view.
Yes.
So we'd be better off to stay Christian and white.
I don't know about Christian. Probably yes. Probably we would. Yeah.
Would you?
But now you're getting ahead of the argument there. Stay white. We are not white. We have never been white, and I give over a whole section to that. This country, from the beginning, was diverse. This country, from its very birth, had diversity. This is the other half of my diversity chapter. We can't not be diverse. The United States can't not be diverse. So we have this issue that diversity is not very good for your society, A, and B, that the United States always has been diverse and it can't not be diverse. And the conclusion that I come to in my chapter is that we should struggle with the diversity the nation was born with, but we're fools to make it worse. And we're fools to think that it's a positive and to pretend to ourselves that it's a positive. It's an obstacle to be overcome. It's not a positive. There's nothing to celebrate. The title of the chapter is Diversity, Nothing to Celebrate. It's nothing to celebrate. We can't avoid it, but we shouldn't make it worse.
You say we were diverse. Well, I don't know how diverse the Pilgrims were. I don't know how diverse the country was in the 18th century or the early part of the 19th or rather the 20th century when, as we talked about earlier, most of the immigration came from Europe. And now, when you talk about, well, should we bring them in from Somalia and a bunch of these other countries, how this is particularly not good for the country, again, it sounds like you are advocating for keeping America white, keeping it Christian, and perhaps even having laws that would mitigate against it becoming anything else.
As I just explained to you, Alan, this is not a white country, and it never has been. I actually quote the percentages at the founding of this country. The present territory of the 48 states at the founding was about 62% white European, about 22% Native American, and about 16% African American. As Alan said, the great wave of immigration in the late 19th century, early 20th century, mainly just made America whiter. So that the 1950 census, in the 1950 census, America was essentially 90% white, 10% black, and a rounding error of other. So that's the diversity we had in 1950. I would argue that we could have coped with that diversity. We could have stayed one nation. We could have overcome the problems that we had in 1950 between black and white. We could have overcome them if we had not been such bloody fools as to import tens of millions of even more diverse people.
In other words,
we should not have done that.
As long as the black population stays below a certain amount, we can cope.
Yes, I think that's true. Yes, I think we can get on with each other. You know, Black Americans have been here longer than most white Americans, actually.
When you say that, so are Native Americans are here longer than anybody. When you say what you just said, combined with your quoting in the book where creed is unlikely to retain its salience if Americans abandon the Anglo-Protestant culture in which it's been rooted, that comes very close to the rhetoric used by white separatists.
Well, I can't help it if you think that. I'm not a white separatist. I have you know, everything I've ever written is on the internet. You can read through it. I'm not a white separatist. So I'm sorry if you think that...
No, I'm not saying you're a white separatist. I said the language you're using comes very close to the language used by white separatists.
Well, I can't help it if you think that. That's not my intention, and that's not my view. And I don't think a fair-minded person would think it was.
No, again, I didn't say it was your view. I said that when you start arguing for, as long as we keep the black population in a certain box, as long as we retain our Anglo-Protestant culture to the extent that we had it, let's say, in 1950, that's very Pat Buchanan-esque, for example, isn't it?
I like Pat Buchanan. He's a good guy.
Right.
Yeah, what's wrong with it? I mean, what's the alternative? Do you think that without an Anglo, what is it Professor Huntington says, an Anglo-Protestant culture, I can't find it, without a dominant Anglo-Protestant culture, that we can stay a united nation? I don't think we can. I think diversity could break us up.
You go on to say a multicultural America will in time become a multi-creedal America with groups with different cultures espousing distinctive political values and principles rooted in their popular cultures. What happened to that Statue of Liberty with the hand held high in the harbor, going, give us you're tired, you're poor, yearning to be free?
Well, please.
The great melting pot, the great mosaic, as David Dinkins once called it. What happened to that?
Well, again, please stop saying that I said that. Professor Samuel Huntington
said
said
as you pointed out, as you quoted in your book,
okay,
and which you are using to buttress your argument.
Good, thank you. Okay. Yeah, but look around you, Alan, and I give the evidence in my book, and Professor Robert Putnam gives it too. Look around you. This level of diversity is not working. I think my private guess, not really very well supported by any data, is that a nation probably can't hold itself together indefinitely without a majority culture of less than about 85%. I think about 10–15% is as much diversity as a nation can handle. And I think if you look around the world, and if you look at the examples from all around the world that I give in my book, I think they bear that out.
And that's why we're doomed.
Well,
among other reasons.
That's one reason we're doomed. Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I got. You got more you want to do?
I don't know.
Right.
I should say, by the way, that in my chapters 9, 10, 11, and 12, the subtitles are Invading the World, that's war, Inviting the World, that's immigration, Inspecting the World, that's my little world tour, and In Hoc to the World, which is my discourse on the sad state of our economy and why it's got that way. Yeah. I think we are doomed. And just to go back to the diversity point, one thing I bring forward in my chapter, which people have just been noticing the last few years, is that somehow, and it's a bit mysterious to me anyway, somehow diversity and modernity don't mix very well. We were better at diversity before the industrial age. Modernity and diversity don't mix very well, and I've got quite a lot on that. You know, the Austro-Hungarian Empire or the Ottoman Empire were extremely diverse, but they had surprisingly little ethnic tension, probably less than we do. So something about modernity makes it more difficult for people to live together. It's sad, but it's true, and if it's true, I want to say it.
I love that defiant look you get sometimes.
Well, I'm kicking against the whole culture here,
right.
aren't I? Not only the...
You're kicking against your own party. You're kicking against conservatism and the people who brought the country to where it was when Barack Obama became President of the United States.
I guess I am, yes. Yeah. All right, does anybody have any more questions? I don't want to keep Alan away from his radio show for too long.
I've got to leave shortly, but
all right.
To get back, because we had.
Well, we can take a couple of questions, I think, and then Alan had better get back.
Well, Mr. Colmes, since you have to leave early, would you be more sympathetic to Mr. Derbyshire's observations about how maybe the world would be better if certain people couldn't vote? If you recall what happened to gay marriage last November in California, which is basically 1/5 of the United States. You do recall what
Well, I
happened
don't know if
there.
California is 1/5 of the United States. I do recall what happened. It's funny, when you had another referendum in California